Commander HFY sat in the cold metal chair and stared at the recording device on the table. His 4 eyes blinked slowly as he tried to push down the memories that wanted to surface. The room was white and clean, nothing like the battlefields he had seen 15 years ago. 3 young Catherian cadets sat across from him, their scales bright green with curiosity. An old military historian sat beside them, her scarred face showing she understood what war really meant. "Commander," the historian said in a soft voice, "the Defense Corps needs these stories on record. Future generations must know what happened during the Human Coalition War." HFY's claws clicked against the table as he shifted in his seat. The cadets looked so young, so sure that they understood warfare. They had studied human tactics in school, read about human weapons and ships, but they had never seen what humans became when people they cared about were in danger. "You think you know about humans," HFY said, his voice rough from years of giving orders. "You have read reports. You have seen their technology. You think they are just another species in the coalition." "Yes," the youngest cadet nodded eagerly. "Sir, humans are effective fighters, but their equipment is basic compared to Catherian systems. Their ships are slower, their weapons have shorter range, and their armor is—" "Stop," HFY raised one clawed hand. "This thinking is why we lost so many good soldiers. You see numbers on reports and think you understand. Let me tell you about Kepler 442b. The room grew quiet. Even the historian leaned forward. Kepler 442b was mentioned in all the war histories, but the details were still classified. "It was a mining world," HFY continued, "rich in rare metals that both sides needed. The humans had built a medical station there to treat wounded coalition soldiers. Nothing special about it. Just a few buildings and a landing pad." He paused, and his eyes went distant, seeing something the others could not. "Our intelligence said the station had maybe 50 humans defending it. Mostly medical staff and a few guards. We sent 3,000 soldiers to take it. Should have been finished in an hour." The cadets exchanged glances. 3,000 against 50 was not a battle, it was target practice. "The first strange thing was the evacuation," HFY said. "When we approached, the humans did something we did not expect. They loaded their ships with wounded coalition soldiers. Catherians, Zealothi, even some Hrun, but here is what made no sense. They put their own wounded last." "Sir?" one cadet asked. "That seems like poor tactical thinking." HFY's laugh was bitter. "Poor tactical thinking. Yes, that is what we thought too. Humans were supposed to care about their own kind first, like any reasonable species. But the medical ship was full of enemy wounded, and the humans stayed behind to defend them." The historian made a note on her pad. This was new information. "We surrounded the station and demanded surrender." HFY continued. "The human commander, I still remember her voice over the radio, said something that confused us. She said, 'These patients are under our protection.' Not, 'We will not surrender,' or 'We will fight to the death.' She said the wounded were under protection." "What happened next, sir?" the youngest cadet asked. "We attacked. We had hover tanks, plasma cannons, air support. The humans had small weapons and medical equipment they had turned into barriers. By any reasonable measure, we should have walked through them in minutes." HFY stood up and walked to the window. Outside, young Catherian soldiers were training in the hot sun. They looked so confident, so sure of their abilities. "The first wave went exactly as planned," he said without turning around. "We broke their outer defenses and pushed them back to the main medical building. But then, something changed. The humans stopped fighting like soldiers." "What do you mean?" the historian asked. "They started fighting like parents protecting their children." HFY turned back to face them. "Do you understand what that means? Not like soldiers following orders or defending territory. Like parents who will do anything to keep their young safe." The cadets looked confused, but the historian was writing quickly. "A wounded human with a broken leg crawled to a plasma cannon and kept firing even when we shot him 3 times. A medic ran into our crossfire to drag a wounded Catherian to safety. She died doing it." The Catherian lived. Zexhai sat back down and his voice got quieter. But the worst part was not their courage. Courage, we understand. Catherians can be brave too. The worst part was that they were winning. Sir, how could 50 humans defeat 3,000 Catherians? Because they were not trying to defeat us, Zexhai said. They were trying to save every wounded soldier in that medical center. And somehow, that made them impossible to stop. He described how the humans had turned their medical equipment into weapons, how they used surgical lasers to blind Catherian sensors, how they filled hallways with anesthetic gas that put Catherian soldiers to sleep, how they used their own damaged vehicles to create new defensive positions. Every time we thought we had them cornered, they found a new way to fight, Zexhai said. Not to kill us, though they did that too, but to protect their patients. We started calling for more soldiers. Then more. By the end of the day, we had sent 12,000 troops to take one medical station. The room was completely silent now. Did you take it? The historian asked. Eventually, after 18 hours. But here is what haunts me. When we finally broke into the medical center, all the patients were alive. All of them. Catherian soldiers, Zelathi pilots, Hrun Marines, the humans had kept them all alive, even while dying themselves. Zexhai looked at each cadet in turn. 12,000 soldiers to defeat 50 humans defending a medical station. And in the end, the humans achieved their goal. They saved every patient. We took the building. But they won the battle in the way that mattered to them. The youngest cadet spoke up, his voice small. Sir, what happened to the human commander? She died holding a medical scanner, checking the vital signs of a Catherian soldier even as our plasma fire cut her down. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Finally, the historian cleared her throat. Commander, this was just one battle. Surely this was unusual behavior, even for humans. Zexhai's 4 eyes focused on her with something like pity. This was the first day of a 3-year war, he said. And every day after this, the humans got worse. The next day, Commander Zexhai returned to the briefing room. The same 3 cadets waited for him. But they looked different now. Less sure of themselves. The youngest one had dark circles under his eyes, as if he had not slept well. You said humans got worse, the historian prompted as Zexhai settled into his chair. Tell us about Station Omega 7. Zexhai was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was even rougher than the day before. Omega 7 was a fuel depot on the edge of human space. It supplied fuel for human ships traveling to the outer colonies. If we took it, we could cut off fuel to 3 human systems. He pulled up a hologram from his personal files. The station looked small and simple. Just a few storage tanks and a control center built into an asteroid. Intelligence said 200 humans were stationed there. Engineers mostly, with maybe 20 guards. We brought 4,000 troops and 2 battleships. This time we were not going to make the same mistake as Kepler 442b. The cadets leaned forward. This sounded like a proper military operation. We cut off all supply lines to the station, Zexhai continued. No ships in or out. No communication with other human bases. Then we waited. Siege warfare. Let them run out of food and air, then they would surrender. Smart thinking, one cadet said. That is what we thought. For 72 hours, we watched and waited. The humans sent a few messages asking for terms, but mostly, the station was quiet. Our sensors showed life signs dropping. By the 3rd day, we detected maybe 50 humans still alive inside. Zexhai paused and his claws clicked on the table. On the 4th day, all life signs stopped. The historian looked up from her notes. All of them? Every human on the station showed as dead on our sensors. No movement, no heat signatures, no electrical activity from their equipment. The station was a tomb, so you moved in to secure it, a cadet said. Yes, we sent 300 soldiers to clear the station and prepare it for Catherian use. They landed without any resistance. The human defenses were offline. The main doors were even unlocked. Zexhai stood up and walked to the window again. But this time he kept talking. The first teams reported exactly what our sensors showed. Dead humans everywhere. Some at their posts, some in the halls, some in their sleeping quarters. All dead from lack of oxygen. Our soldiers started salvaging equipment and checking fuel levels. But something was wrong? The historian asked. The bodies were too neat, HFY said. When people die from lack of air, they panic. They fight. They try to reach emergency stations or airlocks. But these humans were all lying down calmly, and they were wearing their emergency suits. The youngest cadet frowned. If they had emergency suits, why did they die? That is exactly what our teams wondered. So they started checking the bodies more carefully. The suits all showed empty air tanks. But here is the strange part. The suits were designed for 6 hours of emergency air. The humans had been cut off for 72 hours. HFY turned back to face them. One of our engineers decided to scan the air tanks more carefully. And that is when we discovered the truth. He paused, and the room grew tense. The tanks were not empty. They were turned off. All of them. Every human on the station had manually shut down their air supply and entered hibernation mode in their suits. Hibernation mode? A cadet asked. Human emergency suits have a setting that slows down body functions to almost nothing. Heart rate drops, breathing stops, brain activity becomes so low that scanners read it as death. Humans can stay like this for days if they have to. The historian was writing quickly. So they were all alive? Alive and waiting. They had been watching our soldiers through tiny sensors in their suits, learning our patrol patterns, counting our numbers, studying our equipment. For 3 days, they lay perfectly still like corpses, while we planned our attack. HFY's voice got darker. The trap was sprung when our main force was deep inside the station. The dead humans woke up all at once. But they did not just attack us. They had spent 3 days turning their own broken equipment into weapons. He described what happened next. Fuel pipes that had been secretly rewired to spray burning fuel when opened. Air vents that released sleep gas instead of oxygen. Computer terminals that exploded when touched. Storage containers that were actually filled with improvised explosives. But the worst part was not the traps, HFY said. It was the humans themselves. They came out of hibernation, fighting like wild animals. They had been lying still for 3 days, building up anger and energy. When they attacked, it was like facing a pack of hungry beasts. How many soldiers did you lose? The historian asked quietly. 230. Almost all of our assault force. HFY sat back down. And the humans? We killed maybe 40 of them. The rest escaped in shuttles they had hidden in the asteroid field. The cadets looked shocked. This was not how battles were supposed to work. But sir, one of them said, surely your ships could have stopped the shuttles. Our ships were dealing with bigger problems. While our soldiers were trapped inside the station, the humans had been hacking our battleship systems. They turned our own weapons against us, made our engines shut down, locked our commanders out of their own ships. HFY pulled up another hologram showing the 2 battleships. Both looked damaged and dark. We had to evacuate our own ships and call for rescue. 2 battleships disabled by dead engineers, who were not actually dead. The room was quiet again. Finally, the youngest cadet spoke up. Sir, how is that possible? How can anyone plan such a complex trap while pretending to be dead? HFY looked at him with something like sympathy. That is what we asked ourselves. So we studied the station afterwards. We found their planning documents. The humans had war-gamed this exact scenario dozens of times. They knew that any attacking force would check for bodies after a siege. They planned to fake their own deaths from the beginning. But the risk, the historian said, yes. If even one human had panicked and broken hibernation early, the trap would have failed. If our sensors had been better, we would have detected them. If our soldiers had been more careful, they might have survived. But humans are very good at calculating acceptable risks. He stood up again. But here is what still keeps me awake at night. After we rescued our people and regrouped, we intercepted a human transmission. One of the engineers was sending a report to human command. Do you know what he said? The room waited. He said, "Operation successful. Station Omega-7 is no longer useful to enemy forces." Not, "We won," or "We survived." He called the complete destruction of their own base a success, because we could not use it anymore. HFY looked at each cadet. They destroyed everything they had built, killed hundreds of our soldiers, and counted it as a victory because we did not get what we came for. That is when I started to understand that we were not fighting a normal war. The historian closed her notebook. "Commander? Tomorrow can you tell us about Verdania?" HFY's 4 eyes went very still. "Verdania," he whispered. "Yes. Tomorrow I will tell you about the forest moon, where humans taught us what it means to be hunted." Commander HFY did not sleep that night. When he arrived at the briefing room the next morning, his scales had turned a darker shade of green, a sign of stress among Catherians. The cadets noticed but said nothing. "Verdania," HFY said without any greeting. "A forest moon orbiting a gas giant in the Centauri system. The trees there grow 300 meters tall, and the canopy is so thick that very little sunlight reaches the ground." He activated a hologram showing a world covered in endless green forest. It looked peaceful, almost beautiful. Humans had built research stations throughout the forest to study the local plants. Nothing military about them. Just scientists and a few security guards. But Verdania was perfectly positioned to monitor Kytherian fleet movements in 3 nearby systems. The historian was already taking notes. Verdania was mentioned in reports as a minor engagement, but few details had been recorded. We sent a full division to clear the moon, 15,000 soldiers with the best equipment we had. Stealth suits that made us invisible to most sensors. Plasma rifles that could cut through the thick trees. Hover platforms that let us move above the forest floor. 15,000 against how many humans? A cadet asked. "Maybe 800, spread across 12 research stations." HFY's claws clicked nervously. It should have been simple. Land at each station, capture or eliminate the humans, destroy their equipment. We expected to be finished in 2 days. He was quiet for a moment, staring at the hologram of the forest world. The first station went exactly as planned. We surrounded it, demanded surrender, and the humans gave up without a fight. Too easy. But we were pleased with our efficiency. "What was wrong with that?" the youngest cadet asked. "Nothing was wrong with it. That was the problem. The humans made it easy for us to capture that station. They wanted us to take it." HFY changed the hologram to show a map of the forest, with 12 red dots marking research stations. We moved to the second station, then the third. Each time, some humans surrendered, but others seemed to disappear into the forest. Our sensors could not track them through the thick trees, but that did not worry us. A few scientists running around in the woods were not dangerous. The historian looked up from her notes. But they were not just running, were they? No. They were watching, learning, following. HFY's voice got quieter. After we cleared the 5th station, strange things started happening. Soldiers reported hearing sounds in the forest, footsteps that stopped when they turned around, voices calling from the darkness under the trees. Psychological warfare. One cadet said confidently. "We thought so too." So we sent patrols to find the hidden humans and stop their games. But here is what we discovered. Our stealth suits did not work on humans. The cadets looked confused. Catherian stealth technology was supposed to be the best in the galaxy. "The suits made us invisible to electronic sensors," HFY explained. "But humans do not rely only on technology. They used their noses to smell where we had been. They looked for broken plants where we had walked. They listened for sounds our equipment made that our own ears could not hear." "But surely you could track them back," the historian said. "That is what we tried to do. But tracking humans in a forest is like trying to catch smoke." They moved in single file, stepping in each other's footprints. They used running water to hide their scent. They climbed through the trees like the local animals. HFY stood and began pacing around the room. After 3 days, we had cleared 7 stations, but our soldiers were becoming nervous. They felt like they were being watched all the time. Patrols reported seeing movement that disappeared when they looked directly at it. Sentries heard whispers in the darkness but could never find the source. Were they being attacked? A cadet asked. Not attacked. Followed. Always followed. Do you understand what that does to a soldier's mind? To know that somewhere in the forest, eyes are watching you, but you cannot find them no matter how hard you look? The room was very quiet. None of them had experienced that kind of pressure. On the fourth day, we lost our first patrol. 6 soldiers with full stealth gear and heavy weapons. They were doing a routine sweep near the 8th station, when their radio signals stopped. Killed? We found them 12 hours later. Alive but unconscious, hanging upside down from trees, wrapped in their own equipment cables. Not hurt. Just embarrassed and terrified. There was a note pinned to their leader's armor written in perfect Catherian script. HFY paused and his eyes went distant again. What did it say? The historian asked. You are being hunted. Surrender, and you will not be harmed. Continue fighting, and you will be taken one by one until none remain. It was signed, the Verdania Research Team. Quote, the youngest cadet laughed nervously. Research scientists threatening military soldiers? Those research scientists had been living in that forest for 3 years. HFY said sharply. They knew every tree, every stream, every animal path. They could move through the woods without making a sound while we crashed around like deaf children. He activated another hologram showing tracking data from Catherian forces. Look at this. These are movement patterns from our patrols over 6 days. See how they start out confident and organized? By day 3, the patterns become erratic. By day 6, our soldiers are moving in tight groups, afraid to spread out. The data showed exactly what he described. The neat patrol patterns gradually broke down into confused clusters. The humans were not just following us, HFY continued. They were hurting us, pushing us away from important areas while making us think we were making our own decisions. They used fear as a weapon. How? The historian asked. Small things. A soldier would find his equipment moved while he slept. Guards would hear footsteps circling their camp all night but see nothing. Patrols would find arrows stuck in trees exactly where their heads had been moments before. HFY sat back down, and his voice became very quiet. On day 7, we captured one of them. A young human female, barely out of school. We thought finally we could get information about their tactics. And she was bait. While we were questioning her, the other humans rescued her and took 3 of our soldiers with them. Again, no one was hurt. But we found our soldiers 6 hours later, sitting around a campfire eating human food, completely relaxed. The cadets stared at him. They said the humans had been very polite, had shared their food and talked about the forest and the wildlife, had treated their wounds and told them stories. Then they gave them directions back to our base camp and let them go. I don't understand, a cadet said. Neither did we. Here is what we learned later. While those 3 soldiers were enjoying human hospitality, other humans were placing tracking devices on all our equipment. Every vehicle, every weapon, every piece of communication gear. HFY activated one final hologram, showing the forest from above. Dozens of red dots moved through the green canopy. For 7 days, the humans had been watching everything we did. They knew where every soldier was, what equipment we had, how we communicated with our ships. They had turned the entire forest into a hunting ground with us as the prey. The room was completely silent. On day 8, we received new orders. Retreat to the landing zones and evacuate the moon. The operation was terminated. You gave up? The youngest cadet asked. 15,000 soldiers driven off a moon by 800 researchers. HFY's laugh was bitter. But here is the worst part. As our ships were leaving orbit, we intercepted human communications. They were discussing whether to let us go or continue the hunt. What did they decide? They let us leave. But they kept the tracking devices active. For months afterwards, human ships would appear wherever our tagged equipment went. They followed our supply convoys, observed our training exercises, studied our tactics. HFY looked at each cadet in turn. We had to replace everything. Every weapon, every vehicle, every piece of equipment that had been to Verdania. It cost us more resources than losing a fleet battle. The historian closed her notebook and looked troubled. "Commander, these humans sound more like predators than soldiers." "Yes," HFY said simply. "That is exactly what they are. And tomorrow I will tell you what happens when you corner a predator and it has nothing left to lose." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Tonight, when you go to sleep, remember this. Somewhere in the galaxy, there are humans who know how to hunt in the darkness. They can track you through space and time, using methods you cannot even imagine. And the only reason they do not hunt you is because you are not their enemy." The door closed behind him, leaving 4 very thoughtful Catherians alone in the White Room. The 4th day, Commander HFY arrived late. His hands shook slightly as he sat down, and his scales had turned an unhealthy pale green. The historian immediately noticed his condition. "Commander, perhaps we should postpone." "No," his voice was sharp. "This story needs to be told while I still have the courage to tell it." The cadets shifted uncomfortably. They had never seen a decorated war veteran look so disturbed. "The Centauri shipyards," HFY began without preamble. "The largest human ship construction facility outside Earth space. If we captured it, we could cripple human fleet production for years." He activated a hologram showing a massive space station orbiting a bright star. The structure was enormous, with construction bays large enough to build battleships. "We planned the operation for months. 60,000 troops, 12 battleships, full orbital support. This was going to be our decisive victory against the humans." 60,000? A cadet whispered. "That's larger than most planetary invasions." "Yes, we were not taking any chances. Intelligence said the shipyards were defended by maybe 10,000 humans, mostly construction workers and engineers. We expected heavy resistance, but nothing we could not handle." HFY's claws clicked against the table as he continued. "The attack went perfectly at first. We broke through their outer defenses, disabled their weapons platforms, cut off their communications with human command. Within 6 hours, we controlled most of the station." "That sounds successful," the historian said carefully. "It was successful. Too successful. We captured over 3,000 human prisoners, including the station commander and most of his senior staff. The remaining humans were trapped in the central construction bays, with no way to escape." HFY paused and stared at the hologram for a long moment. "Standard military doctrine says that at this point, the humans should have surrendered. They were outnumbered 6 to 1, cut off from help, with no hope of victory. Their leaders were captured. Their defenses were broken. But they didn't surrender," the youngest cadet said. "No, they did something much worse. They activated what we later learned was called the Berserker Protocol." The room grew very quiet. None of them had heard this term before. "What is the Berserker Protocol?" the historian asked. "When humans believe their captured people are in immediate danger, they can trigger a combat state that changes them into something else entirely. Their bodies release powerful drugs that increase strength, speed, and aggression, while shutting down their ability to feel fear or pain." HFY stood up and began pacing again, but this time his movements were jerky and nervous. "The first sign something was wrong came from our prisoner holding areas. The captured humans started singing. Singing? Battle songs, war chants. In perfect harmony, like they had practiced for years. Our guards reported that the prisoners were completely calm, but their songs were disturbing. They sang about death and glory, and protecting their families. I mean, in the center, I was knowing Tansid. I was not a Venet. I was knowing Offer. I was knowing Mini. I was knowing Minia. I was knowing Offered by W's. I was knowing Minia. He activated another hologram showing the interior of the station. Red dots marked Kytherian positions, while blue dots showed the remaining human defenders. Then we started receiving strange communications from the human defenders. Not requests for surrender terms or pleas for mercy. They were asking us to release their captured people. That seems reasonable, a cadet said. The way they asked was not reasonable. They said, return our people unharmed within 1 hour, or we will come for them. Not, please consider, or we are willing to negotiate. They stated it like a fact of nature. HFY's voice got quieter and more strained. Our commander laughed at the demand. 3,000 humans against 60,000 Catherians? He ordered the prisoners moved to the station's central core and threatened to execute them if the defenders did not surrender. The historian stopped taking notes and looked up with concern. What happened next? The singing stopped. All at once, every human prisoner fell silent. Then we started getting reports from our forward positions that something was wrong with the remaining defenders. HFY activated security footage showing human workers in the construction bays. At first, they looked normal. But as the recording played, the cadets could see the change. Watch their movements, HFY said. See how they start moving differently? Faster. More aggressively. Look at their faces. The humans in the recording were transforming. Their expressions became cold and focused. They moved with predatory grace, checking weapons and equipment with mechanical precision. The chemical changes in human bodies during berserker state are incredible, HFY explained. Heart rate increases to dangerous levels. Pain receptors shut down. The parts of their brains responsible for self-preservation become inactive. They become fearless? A cadet asked. Worse than fearless. They become unstoppable. Fear keeps normal people from taking terrible risks. Remove fear, and humans will attempt things that should be impossible. The security footage showed humans starting to move toward Catherian positions. They were not sneaking or hiding. They walked openly through corridors that should have been death traps. Our soldiers opened fire as soon as they saw the humans approaching. Direct hits that should have dropped them immediately. But humans in berserker state do not stop fighting until their bodies literally cannot continue. HFY's hands were shaking more now. I watched a human female take 3 plasma bolts to the chest and continue running toward our position. She was carrying a piece of construction equipment like a weapon. She should have been dead, but she kept coming for another 30 seconds. How is that possible? Human bodies produce incredibly powerful painkillers during berserker state. They also release stimulants that keep muscles working even when severely damaged. A human can fight for minutes with wounds that would kill other species instantly. The cadets were staring at the security footage with growing horror. The humans in the recording were moving like machines, ignoring injuries that should have stopped them. But the worst part was not their resistance to damage, HFY continued. It was their creativity. Humans in berserker state do not just fight harder, they fight differently. He showed them more footage. Humans using construction tools as weapons, turning industrial equipment into improvised bombs, using their own damaged ships as projectiles. They welded together pieces of scrap metal to make armor. They turned mining lasers into weapons. They used magnetic cranes to throw our own vehicles at us. Everything in that station became a potential weapon. How long did this last? The historian asked quietly. 6 hours. 6 hours of humans doing impossible things while slowly fighting their way toward the prisoner holding area. We lost 8,000 soldiers in those 6 hours. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of HFY's claws clicking against the table. The human who reached the prisoners first was a young engineer named Marcus Chen. He had been shot 14 times and had a piece of metal sticking through his chest. By all medical knowledge, he should have been dead for an hour. HFY's voice became barely a whisper. He walked into the prisoner area, looked at our guards, and said in perfect Catherian, "Return my people now, or I will take them." 1 human against 50 armed Catherian soldiers. What did your soldiers do? They gave him the prisoners, all 3,000 of them. Then they evacuated that section of the station. The youngest cadet looked confused. 50 soldiers were afraid of 1 wounded human? HFY turned to look at him directly. You have never seen a human in full berserker state. Chen's eyes were completely black. He was covered in blood. His own and others. He moved like a hunting animal. And he was smiling. The cadet shuddered. But here is what still gives me nightmares, HFY continued. After Chen secured the prisoners, he did not try to escape. He did not even try to get medical treatment. He stood guard over them while the other humans evacuated the station. Did he survive? No. He died standing up. still watching the corridors for threats. When we found his body 3 hours later, he was still gripping a plasma rifle with both hands. HFY sat back down heavily. The humans evacuated their people and destroyed the shipyards as they left. Everything we had fought to capture was turned into scrap metal and floating debris. We gained nothing and lost 8,000 soldiers. The historian was writing again, but her hand was shaking. Commander, how many humans died in this battle? Maybe 200. Most of those died after the berserker drugs wore off, and their injuries finally killed them. 200 humans defeated 60,000 Catherians? No, HFY said firmly. 200 humans convinced 60,000 Catherians that victory was not worth the cost. There is a difference. He stood up to leave. Tomorrow, I will tell you the final story. About why we sued for peace, and why I still have nightmares 15 years later. As he reached the door, the youngest cadet called out, "Sir? Are there still humans who can do this? Who can enter berserker state?" "Sir?" HFY paused without turning around. "All of them," he said simply. "Every single human has this capability. They just choose not to use it unless they have no other option." The door closed behind him, leaving 4 very quiet Catherians to think about what they had learned. On the 5th day, Commander HFY entered the briefing room to find only 2 people waiting for him. The youngest cadet and one of the others had requested transfers to different units. The historian sat alone with her notes, and her expression was troubled. "The others could not handle hearing more," she said simply. HFY nodded as if he had expected this. He looked older than he had 4 days ago, and his scales had taken on a dull, faded color that spoke of deep exhaustion. "Perhaps they are wise," he said, settling into his chair one last time. "What I am about to tell you is why the Catherian Empire sued for peace with humanity. And it has nothing to do with human weapons or technology or numbers." The remaining cadet leaned forward nervously. "Sir, we won most of our battles against humans. Our casualties were acceptable. Our technology was superior. Why did we stop fighting?" "Because we were winning," HFY said simply. The cadet looked confused, but the historian understood immediately. "The cost of victory was too high," she said quietly. "Not in soldiers or resources," HFY clarified. "The cost was what we were becoming. Every battle with humans changed us a little bit more, and not for the better." He activated one final hologram, this one showing casualty reports and psychological evaluations from throughout the 3-year war. "Look at these numbers. Not the dead and wounded, but the other statistics. Requests for transfer away from human combat zones, soldiers refusing orders, mental health breakdowns, desertion rates." The data was shocking. By the end of the war, nearly 40% of Catherian forces had requested reassignment away from any duty involving human contact. "After the Centauri shipyards, something broke in our military," HFY continued. "Soldiers who had fought humans started having nightmares. They would wake up screaming about being hunted or watched. Many could not sleep without lights on. Road. But sir, Catherians are warriors," the cadet protested. "We have fought many species across the galaxy." "Yes. We fought the Zalathi Empire for 12 years. We battled the Rune Confederation for 8 years. We conquered 17 different species and absorbed them into our empire. But fighting humans was different." HFY's voice became distant again, as if he were seeing something far away. "When you fight other species, you understand their motivations. The Zalathi wanted territory. The Rune wanted resources. Others wanted revenge, or power, or glory. We could predict their actions because their goals made sense. Humans had goals too," the historian said. "Yes, but their goals were not logical. They did not fight for territory or resources or power. They fought for ideas, abstract concepts like freedom and justice and protection of innocence. How do you fight an enemy whose primary weapon is moral certainty?" The hologram changed to show battle footage from various human conflicts. In every scene, humans could be seen helping wounded enemies, protecting civilians, sacrificing themselves for others. We started taking prisoners early in the war to learn about human tactics and psychology, but the prisoners confused us even more. They would not break under interrogation because they truly believed their cause was right. All soldiers believe in their cause, the cadet said. No, not like this. When we captured a Zalathi soldier, we could offer them better treatment, more resources, protection for their families. Eventually, most would cooperate or at least stop fighting. But human prisoners would look us in the eye and explain, politely and calmly, why we were wrong to attack innocent people. Zexhai's claws clicked against the table as he remembered. They did not hate us. That was the worst part. They saw us as misguided rather than evil. They would share their food with Catherian guards. They would ask about our families and cultures. They treated their captivity like an opportunity to teach us better ways to live. The historian was writing quickly, trying to capture every word. Some of our guards started requesting different assignments because they could not handle the psychological pressure of imprisoning people who treated them with kindness and respect. "What about your soldiers in the field?" she asked. The same problem, but worse. Human soldiers would sometimes stop fighting in the middle of battles to help wounded Catherians. They would share water and medical supplies with enemy troops. They would risk their own lives to save Catherian soldiers who were trapped or injured. The cadet shook his head. That makes no tactical sense. Exactly. It made no sense, but it happened constantly. And each time it happened, our soldiers had to ask themselves difficult questions. Why would an enemy save your life? What kind of people risk themselves to help their attackers? Zexhai stood up and walked to the window one last time. Outside, the training exercises continued, but they looked different now. Less certain, less aggressive. By the second year of war, we were winning every major battle but losing something more important. Our soldiers were losing their will to fight humans, not because they were afraid, though many were, but because they were starting to respect their enemies too much. Respect? When you fight someone who consistently shows mercy to your wounded, courage in impossible situations, and loyalty to abstract principles, it becomes very difficult to see them as an enemy worth defeating. The hologram changed again to show a graph of Catherian military efficiency over time. The line declined steadily throughout the war. Our troops were becoming reluctant to use their most effective weapons against human positions. They would hesitate before firing on human medical facilities, even though humans often placed military equipment near hospitals. They would warn human civilians before attacking their cities. Those sound like good military practices, the historian said. They are. But they were not Catherian military practices before the war. Humans were changing us just by being themselves, making us more merciful, more careful about civilian casualties, more willing to take risks to avoid unnecessary deaths. Zexhai turned back to face them. The moment I knew the war was lost was after a battle on Proxima Centauri B. We had just defeated a human garrison after a week-long siege. As my soldiers were securing the area, they found a human field hospital treating wounded from both sides. He paused, and his voice became very quiet. My soldiers asked me what they should do with the human medics. Standard Catherian doctrine said to capture or eliminate them. But these medics had been treating our wounded soldiers alongside their own. Some of our troops owed their lives to human doctors. What did you order? I told them to leave the hospital alone and post guards to protect it. And as I gave that order, I realized that fighting humans had changed me into someone I did not recognize. Someone who valued mercy over military efficiency. The room was completely silent. That night, I sent a coded message to Catherian High Command, recommending immediate peace negotiations with humanity. Because you could not defeat them? The cadet asked. Because defeating them would have required us to become something we were not, something worse than we were before the war started. To truly defeat humans, we would have had to stop taking prisoners, stop respecting medical facilities, stop caring about civilian casualties. Zexhai's 4 eyes focused on the cadet with intensity. We would have had to become monsters. And the humans knew this. I think they were counting on it from the beginning. The historian looked up from her notes. You think the war was a trap? Not a military trap. A moral trap. Humans fought in such a way that any enemy who wanted to defeat them would have to abandon everything that made them civilized. They forced us to choose between victory and our souls. HFY sat back down and his scales began to show their natural color again, as if telling these stories had lifted a great weight from his shoulders. The war ended 6 months after I sent that message. The peace negotiations took only 3 weeks, because humans offered terms that were more generous than anything we expected. They asked for nothing except guarantees that we would not attack other innocent species. What did you think of that? The cadet asked. I thought it proved my point. Even in victory, humans were more concerned with protecting others than with punishing their enemies. They treated defeated Kytherians with the same respect they showed their allies. The historian closed her notebook and looked thoughtful. Commander, do you think we made the right choice in seeking peace? Look at us now, HFY said, gesturing toward the window where young Kytherians were training in the sun. We are better soldiers than we were before the war, more disciplined, more ethical, more concerned with protecting innocence. Fighting humans taught us to be better versions of ourselves. He stood up to leave for the final time. The war is over, but humans are still out there in the galaxy, still protecting the weak, still fighting for justice, still willing to sacrifice themselves for abstract principles that they consider more important than their own lives. Does that frighten you? The cadet asked. HFY paused at the door and considered the question carefully. No, he said finally. It gives me hope. As long as there are humans in the universe, someone will stand up for what is right. Even when it seems impossible, someone will protect the innocent, even at great cost to themselves. Someone will show mercy to their enemies and kindness to strangers. He looked back at the 2 remaining listeners. We fought them for 3 years and learned something important. Humans are not just another species in the galaxy. They are what the rest of us could become if we were brave enough to try. The door closed behind him, leaving the historian and cadet alone with the weight of everything they had learned. After a long silence, the cadet spoke. Do you think other species know about this? The historian gathered her notes and smiled for the first time in 5 days. They will. These stories need to be shared throughout the galaxy. Not as warnings about human military capabilities, but as examples of what is possible when someone chooses to fight for something greater than themselves. She stood and headed for the door. The universe is a better place because humans are in it. And now that we understand that, perhaps we can learn to be better neighbors to them. Outside the window, the sun set over Kyther Prime, casting long shadows across the training grounds where the next generation of Kytherian soldiers prepared for a future where they would fight alongside humans instead of against them. And in the gathering darkness, Commander HFY finally slept without nightmares for the first time in 15 years.